Hello, everybody. Let's talk gun rates today. Let's talk Second Amendment. Now, this video is not going to go into talking about whether we should have the Second Amendment or not. This is not going into talking about the moral issues, whether there are any or not, around owning firearms, whether we should have the Second Amendment or not. I'm not even going to go into that whole thing. This is trying to just give people a little bit of something to think about when you consider our Second Amendment rights. This is obviously going to dig a little bit into what do we use to consider, what makes a country free or not. Does the Second Amendment take a part of that? Does it not? What do we think about that? I want to do a second video on how they actually rank nations on their freedom and what makes them free. What do you take into consideration? Free within your nation to come and go as you please, those types of things. What really makes you free? Now, obviously, in the United States, everyone knows that our Second Amendment rights have been very vital in our nation, in our history. The firearm has been a tremendous tool that we have used. It is something that helped us settle our kind of our West, or settle the United States. There are many different ways on how you can view that, but nonetheless, it was a very important tool. And obviously, also winning our independence, that is undoubtedly one of the things that helped us do that, right? So whether the Second Amendment is a valid thing that we should have or not, I'm not digging into that, but we do need to recognize that it is something that is very important. It is a very heated discussion, and coming from a conservative background, this is something that in our conservative politics is a very, very big issue, and our country fights over this all the time. But there is just one thing that I want to focus on here is, do our Second Amendment rights actually preserve our freedom, and what do we want the Second Amendment for? And how logical is this, and this, that, and the other thing? And obviously this is just my opinion. But what we need to start out doing is actually looking at the rest of the world, and we need to see what does the rest of the world do. And this is just for context, okay? So over 175 other countries in the world actually allow you to own firearms. Now, this varies by greatly on what type of firearms you can own and what the process is of being able to legally obtain one, right? Now, there's only 3 nations in the world that actually protect your right to own a firearm by their constitutional rights, essentially. And believe it or not, the United States is not the only one. But obviously, we know that the United States is one. Then there's Mexico, and there's Guatemala. In the back of your mind, just keep it there. Let it, chew on it a little bit. Do you, as an American, look at Mexico and Guatemala as free nations? Now, they're ranked pretty low in the world when you actually look up the most free nations in the world, and countries where you don't have too many liberties, where they're still allowed to own firearms and are actually protected as a right, that it might not necessarily make that country in particular a free country. So just the right to own a firearm does not necessarily constitute a free nation. Once again, we're just drawing context here. You can actually look up the rankings of different nations. My camera glitches a little bit when I open this website because I think this website uses a lot of data. Because it has a map, it has a world map on it where you can hold your cursor over different nations, and it kind of gives you the rundown on them, where they're ranked, and it gives you the personal freedom and the economic freedom, which they take both of those factors and bundle them into one, coming up with the human freedom, which is your overall freedom. And you could argue that there are more things that make a nation free or not, but there's a bunch of different factors that go into something like the personal freedom. So there's a bunch of different subcategories underneath that as well. And I was extremely shocked to find out when I came on this website that the United States is not even listed in the top 10 most free nations in the world. So, according to the rest of the world, despite how you view America and the United States, the rest of the world does not view the United States as one of the most free countries in the world. Now, I mean, there's hundreds of nations. So, of course, you can, we're still pretty high overall, but for us to consider ourselves the land of the free, the home of the brave, kind of what we were raised thinking and believing and all this kind of stuff, right? That we are not even in the top 10. I mean, how could that be possible? So the top 10 nations are, and I will list them in order from the most free, being number 1 to 10. So 1, Switzerland, New Zealand, Denmark, Estonia, Ireland, Finland, Canada, Australia, Sweden, and Luxembourg. Those are the top 10 free nations according to the rest of the world, right? So the United States, where do we lie? We lie at number 15. And believe it or not, the UK, the country that we gained our freedom from, is actually ranked at 14. So they are considered by the rest of the world as being more free than the United States is. Now, the United States, we're very strong on we're not very strong on personal freedoms. Because come to find out, even though we believe in things like free market, like capitalism, we actually also have a lot of socialistic properties. It might come as a shock, but we can go into that some other time. And then also, our economic freedom is very strong, and that's what kind of pulls us up. So we're listed as one of the top nations in economic freedom, but just not in personal freedom. So that's kind of crazy. Anyways, that website is called worldpopulationreview.com, and I will actually list that then as a link in the description and everything to go check. Now, Second Amendment. Let's come back to the Second Amendment. We tend to look at a couple different rights, hold on to them tightly, and say that as long as we have these rights, then we can consider ourselves free. So the way that we look at the Second Amendment is that it obviously historically it was used in many different ways. It was the tool that essentially tamed the West. Our conquest of settling the West, we needed it to survive, to hunt, we needed it for personal protection. The list goes on and on and on. And obviously there were some very good things about guns and firearms, but we also used them to do some very horrible things too. But nonetheless, it was a very important tool in our history. And we have, I think because of that, we view firearms in a much different way than the rest of the world does. This happened relatively recently in world history that this has happened, so it's something that courses through our veins, so to speak, to this day. But we have taken that and said, hey, as long as we have firearms, we're a free country because we the people can, grab our AR-15s or whatever we have available and go out there and stand up against a tyrannical government. And that sounds good, but is that actually practical? So let's break down some things about firearms, and this is just more kind of things because I have been steeped in firearms my whole history. I was in the military. I grew up in a very conservative family, using firearms from a very young age, hunting, all of those types of things, and just loving to shoot. I mean, for sport, target shooting, all of those kinds of things. So let's look at this from a practical perspective. Things on paper can normally look very good, but then when you go to put them in practice, they kind of tend to fall apart a little bit. Now, one thing when we look at the modern era right now, for one, we have Second Amendment rights, right? So that even allows us to own the scary AR-15, right? But what is that really when you compare all the different weaponry that governments own today? And also the practicality of someone owning a firearm that stays in their gun safe 95% of the time. They whip it out, take it to the range once or twice a year, stand at the 50-yard line, 25-yard line, crank out 1 or 2 magazines of ammo, hardly aiming, hoping that they hit, a 2 foot by 2 foot target or something like that. And as long as they're within 6 inches, they have a couple bullets within 6 inches of the bullseye, they're happy, they go home with a smile on their face, and so be it. And that's fine. That is totally fine. You like to go shoot. That's awesome. No problem. What I'm saying is, what is the practicality of that? So, I would be willing to guess that 75% of gun owners have never fired a gun, a firearm, over 100 yards. Okay, military terms it'd be 100 meters, okay, but we'll use yards for the standard American public, right? Most people have never fired their gun beyond 100 yards. Even if it's your old 30-06, bolt action rifle with a scope on it. Most people still have not fired over 100 yards. Most people with an AR-15, like I said, they like to go do a couple mag dumps at maybe 50 yards. A lot of them are even closer than that. And then they go home. But most of them, most of the time, don't even fire at 75 to 100 yards. So now you're going up and you're expecting some of these people to go defend your freedoms against a trained army, Marines, Air Force, all of this kind of thing, and they're grossly out of shape, have not actually done any type of tactical training, have not fired their weapons beyond 100 yards, they've never done any reflex shooting, they just flat out, America is a very out of shape country. We have ideals in our head and they are just not necessarily practical, okay? The idea sounds good to be able to own an AR-15, but when you step out of your door and you're looking down the barrel of an M1 Abrams tank, it's a little bit of a different story, right? And I don't know any civilians who really have functioning M1 Abrams in their arsenal to be able to stand up against another M1 Abrams. Could obviously argue that, part of the military would defect and they would help you out, and so therefore you would also have some on your side. However, there are many caveats to that as well that I just flat out do not have the time to go through on this video. You could spend hours talking about that whole thing, and there are very practical discussions around that, but I don't think that it would necessarily turn out the way you might think it would. Second of all, so now I was even in the military, right? So I've had training. I fire my AR-15s, my guns and everything. But they're out of hobby now because I've taken away this grand envisioned idea of me standing up against some tyrannical government. And I've also lost complete faith in the American people to even be able to consolidate themselves and organize themselves behind certain leaders to even be able to get their foot out the door, to be honest with you. And many of us, such as myself, I am married, I have children, I have things that I want to live for. And I honestly cannot envision myself at my age anymore of stepping outside the door and, joining some militia like the Proud Boys or something like that and going and storming the doors of the Capitol or something like that, or Washington, D.C. And not only that, you can go and take over the Capitol all you want to, and you really did nothing but go take over a building. It means nothing. So anyways, what is really the practicality of it all? I see so many people out there in their 30s and 40s who never enlisted. The nation was at war for 20-some years, or 20 years, let's just say 20 years. We were at war. They went through their prime through those years. They are extremely patriotic people, and they never enlisted, okay? Do you expect those people to pick up their firearms and to go actually use them and stand up against a tyrannical government when they had the opportunity to get, I mean, whether you want to look at it, the opportunity to get training or defend their country, any of those types of things over the past 20 years, when most of them would say that our freedoms were at stake, many would believe that we were absolutely justified in doing what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, which is a completely different subject as well, but still stayed home. They didn't go. And you can have all the excuses you want in the world, because everybody could have one. Well, I had a girlfriend, I had a fiance, I was this, that, and the other thing, I had a good job, I was in college. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. That's beside the point. You didn't do it, and I would be willing to bet that most of the people did not, and would not actually arm themselves and go stand up against a tyrannical government. Now, I mean, obviously, if a military is actively pursuing you and they're going to come do something to you, regardless of what you do, and they're going to actually come into your homes, people would obviously defend themselves, but you can see that happening across the world. You can take Ukraine right now. I don't think they had any firearms rights, and they're still doing just fine defending their country, okay? But they're also fighting an outside government who was looking to take over their country as well. But anyways, so how practical is this? I mean, so let's say that even 1 to 5% of the population would actually have the training and the skills necessary to actually stand up against a military. Then you still have to look at equipment, logistics. Like, it takes massive amounts of logistics to do something like this. And once again, Ukraine is being backed by governments. They're not an independent people trying to fight their own government. The logistics are being provided for them, okay? So what you have to start looking at logistics. I mean, good grief, beans and bullets, right? And things then like armor and, I mean, aviation. Where are you going to get like radar? I mean, all of those types of things. And not only that is the intelligence. Like, how do you have access to things like satellites? Those are becoming more and more important. I mean, the thing of it is that the practicality of actually being able to stand up to a government because you have the right to own a gun is a fantasy, in my opinion. In my opinion, it's a fantasy. But this is what makes it powerful, but for a different reason than you might think. If the public believes that you, as long as you have your Second Amendment rights, that you are a free country, then your rights can be eroded away out from underneath you and around you, and you're sitting there just looking at your guns in your closet saying, I'm a free man, when I have lost my right to literally walk across the street and buy a gallon of milk from the dairy farmer. That's not even legal. I can't do it. I could actually get in pretty serious trouble. Not to mention that the dairy farmer could literally lose his business if he was caught selling milk. I live in rural America, so I use a lot of these types of examples. I can't even go to a farmer under my own free will, making my own assessments, being raised on farms and everything. I can't go to a farmer and say they have a hog there, okay, that I want, and I want it butchered in my freezer. I can't go to him, ask him for the hog, and have him butcher it, slaughter it, and everything like that, and then give it to me. I can't do that. That's illegal. I have to go through an authorized butcher shop in order to do that. Now, you can make all the excuses you want about regulations and sanity and this, that, and the other thing, but me as an autonomous person who should be able to inform myself and be able to do what I want. Like, so I want to go buy pork from a local farmer down the road and have him take care of the whole process. I can't do that in America. It's illegal, okay? And there's lots of other things that restrict my freedom with taxations and things that we don't even call tax, but they are, like registrations of your vehicles and all of these different things, property taxes. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. You can come up with a ton of things on your own in a very short amount of time that restrict your liberties as an American citizen. But as long as you're allowed to sit there and look at your gun safe and say, I've got an AR-15 in there and 3 other guns, and I've got a 9mm and a 45 and this, that, and the other thing, I'm a free man. As long as you look at it that way, and as long as our population and a certain demographic of our country continues to base their freedoms off of that, then you're going to continue losing your freedoms. And I'm not even one of these big conspiracy theorists that are like, oh my goodness, like, our government's after us and they're just out there to hurt us and take advantage of us. No. I'm not even that. I'm just simply saying that if you honestly believe that your freedoms are based off of the Second Amendment, then I think you might need to step back just a little bit and take some other things into consideration. Because, I mean, to be honest with you, when I was in the military, if I would have had to look at half of the people out here who are talking about their need to own a firearm to protect themselves against the military, and if I would have, okay, I'm just saying, I would not have been threatened, okay? If I see some of the people who say that they would be coming after me with an AR, I would have been like, dude, come on, seriously. Like, would not have had a chance. I mean, and now I know it doesn't take any skill to lay behind a log and shoot something at 100 meters, but that's just not how things work. Now, most of us enjoying our rights to hunt, our freedom to hunt, most people can't even shoot a deer at 50 yards in the woods. Okay, so I don't even, and that's just shooting at a deer. That's not bullets flying both ways. So just the overall practicality of it, it's just not there. It's just not practical. That's not me sitting there saying that you need to give up your Second Amendment rights. I'm just saying you might just want to take some other things in consideration. I know somebody who's very vocal in our local community here, who's super heavy, patriotic, and was calling people cowards for, owning things made by China and stuff like that. But this person went through their prime, and this person is also so super, Second Amendment, pro-Second Amendment. But this person went through their prime through the 20 years that we've been at war, and also a complete and total believer, I believe, in our military and what we were doing as a country. And never enlisted, but is so free to call other people cowards. And I don't want to group everybody into a certain demographic of people. However, I find that to be pretty common among that crowd of people who really, really say that they need their guns so that they can stand up against our government. And I just don't have faith in those people. I just don't. And I don't think that most of those people would ever have the stomach for it either. Like, if they actually saw the absolute carnage that would come out of something like that, something that the United States has not seen, at least since the Civil War, but probably could very easily put the Civil War to shame. If you look at Ukraine right now, it is very much similar to World War I in the way things look, the destruction, and the amount of deaths that are happening there on a daily basis, and the amount of struggle and the absolute apocalyptic landscapes that are left behind this fighting. And if you think that if it would actually come to blows between the civilian population and the government, that it would be this Revolutionary War type of idea where you're standing out in a cornfield lobbing bullets back and forth, and it's going to be this neat little fight that's going to last 2 years, and then everybody's going to get to go home and have a hero's parade. You have seriously lost touch with reality, because that's not how it would be at all. Anyways, think about it. Have a good one.